All right, so our last section today is going to be covering job hazard analysis, or JHAs. For those of you that were on the webinar yesterday, this is going to be somewhat repetitive, but at least now you can actually have the hands-on information and some of the demonstration information that we go through. So first off, in order to understand why a JHA is necessary, we have to look at OSHA's general duty clause. Each of his employees' employment and a place of employment, which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to its employees. So the big thing here is that if we know that there might be something that potentially could harm our employees, we need to protect our workers against it. Okay, and that's this right here. Any hazard for which Section 5A1, that's the General Duty Clause violation, is issued, must be reasonably foreseeable. So what they say is that in order for this citation to actually go out, you need to have had reasonably foreseen that this could have potentially been something that would have occurred. Well, how do we actually determine what could actually be a hazard or what could potentially happen? We aren't psychics. We can't look in our crystal ball and say, this is going to happen on this job or that job. So instead what we should be doing is actually going out and performing job hazard analysis. And one of the things that we can do to even start that is start it by doing what's called a preliminary hazard assessment. This can be something as simple as going on Google Earth, looking at a map from a bird's eye view of a facility, having our salesmen, who in my mind are our first line of defense, and I think a couple of you mentioned that you have to talk to your salesmen about certain things when it comes to safety. And I think one of the biggest things you can do is have them be a part of what we call a job hazard analysis. So as far as the preliminary hazard assessment goes, we should be looking for things that are common in most job sites or are common in most facilities or buildings. And that can include things like power lines or electricity. Where are they set up, and how might they affect me when I start performing my job? Other utilities such as propane, natural gas, even sewer systems. I had cases where we couldn't set up cranes in certain areas because of the potential to damage the sewer line underneath. So it's all things that we should be looking for ahead of time. Look for standing water, because of course if we have standing water at a job site, we know that the ground structure may not be capable of withholding loads or may change during the course of our job. Structural integrity, that kind of goes without saying. We have to look at the decking, both top and bottom, to determine if there's any damage. Okay, and how do we do that? Well, it's by actually getting out there and actually doing the investigation ourselves. All right, trees, poles, different things that may be getting in the way of different things that we have set up. Even the potentials for rescue. These are things that on our preliminary assessment, we can be determining whether or not it's going to cause a problem in the case of somebody having a fall. And if so, how do we get rescue equipment into that area, or how can we actually safely rescue them with the use of other means? Debris, this is another one that we have to look for. What junk is gathered there? And I think yesterday on the webinar I had mentioned that debris is another thing that we're not necessarily responsible for cleaning up a job site before we get there, but how many of us as roofers have gone out to a job site and had to clean up an area that necessarily wasn't our fault, or the debris wasn't necessarily our fault, because we forgot to really kind of look at the job ahead of time and ask if they could move some of this stuff. And then lastly, on that preliminary assessment, we should be looking for people, pets, workers. We should also be looking for exits and entrances to the facility. Talk to the building owner or facility managers about whether or not they actually have shift changes during the course of your day and how that might affect those workers and how might it affect your work as well. Because of course we don't want to have workers, employees, the general public, people, pets, or anything of that nature coming into our job area and actually being put at risk. So the first really preliminary assessment is an overview of exactly what we're going to see at the job site. It's kind of a catch-all. It's kind of that we're delving in a little bit to the job site itself. We're not getting into specifics of what's going to happen during the job. But it does take out a lot of the risk. Now, one of the things about the preliminary assessment that I always told my salesmen and I always told my safety directors was make sure that when you go out on this preliminary assessment, you're taking photos, and if at all possible, take video of all the information that's out there and the job site they're going to be working on. As roofers, I think we've all had to pay once or twice for cracked concrete or some asphalt repairs that not necessarily were our fault, but we ended up forgetting to do anything prior to the job site to recognize those. And in the end, the owner came back and said, you know, wait a second, I don't think that was damaged before you guys got here. Why don't you pay for it? So we have to be careful with this, and that's why I always said filming, videotaping, taking pictures as much as possible prior to the job start is going to be critical for us. So once we've done our preliminary assessment, it's now time to actually get into the meat and potatoes of what we have to do as risk assessors for our job sites. And the way we do that is by performing a job hazard analysis. Now, I've handed out to all of you a blank copy of a typical or standard job hazard analysis, and then I've also had one that I actually had filled in somewhat for some jobs. The basics of a job hazard analysis are 4 separate parts. Of course, we have the upper part of the body of this, which is going to be the information about who's filling it out, what contract is it for, the job name and description, and those parties that are responsible for actually filling it out. But secondly, we get down to this bottom portion, which covers 4 different specific sections. The work task, which is exactly what the employees are going to be doing during that work day. And one of the things I'd like to talk about here is the stocking of roofing materials and equipment. A basic standard thing that we do on every single one of our jobs is to get materials and supplies up to the rooftop. So it's a work task that we're going to be performing. Other things in this could be climbing a ladder. It could be, you know, craning up materials. There's a number of different things that we have on this. But our work task in general, in this case, is going to be stocking roofing materials and equipment. So once we determine what the work task is, we then have to go to what potential hazards are. And this is where we have to look into our crystal ball as safety directors and risk assessors and say what could potentially happen while we're actually performing that job task. And in this case, I put a couple things down, and only a few here for examples. But how about unsafe equipment? We get out to the job site, we start to load that job site, and we determine that we have some equipment that whether it has broken parts or whether something's not there, a cap, a wire is disconnected, or there's some damage from when we were hoisting it. In that situation, what we have to do is actually take that piece of equipment and look at it as if I don't want this to get onto the rooftop. Because one of the things we have to do is make sure that all of our equipment and any recognizable hazard that we have there is taken out of the scenario, right? So we go to that next section. So we've got the work task. We know what the potential hazard could be. Our next section would be hazard control measures and safe work practices. So in this case, what do we do if we find that damaged piece of equipment or an unsafe piece of equipment out on the job site? And in this situation, I put a couple of different things that we could do. First off is to remove that piece of equipment from the job site, okay? And the way we do that is by tagging that piece of equipment out and actually removing it physically from the job site, getting it out so that no one could potentially use it and be harmed by that piece of equipment. Secondly, we could try to make repairs there at the job site if we know exactly how. If it's a simple fix, go ahead and make the repairs to that situation. Whether it's a hose, whether it's a wire that needs to be put back, or you have another cap or something that needs to be put on, we can make those repairs there. But what if we can't do any of that? What if we can't figure out how to solve that problem or fix that problem right there on the job site? That's when we go to our 4th section in this job hazard analysis, and that's that contingency plan. Have a backup plan for everything. It can be something as simply as taking it out of servicing and sending it back to the shop to the maintenance to do those simple fix or repairs. Or in some cases, it could be contacting your safety director, or in many cases, depending on the type of hazard and what actually occurs, could be calling 911. Okay? So the basics of this JHA are that we find out what a potential work task is, a simple task that we do on every single job. And of course, from job to job and from different roofing system to different roofing system, we're going to need to come up with a variety of different tasks. So it's not a one-size-fits-all type of thing that we can do here or analysis. We actually have to determine each job what we're going to be doing. So for example, hot asphalt job has many different hazards associated with it as compared to a EPDM roofing system, okay? So with those two systems, we can come up with some general ideas. Now I will tell you this, that when I did these in the past, what I did is I did come up with specifics for rubber roofing systems, asphalt roofing systems, modified systems, torch down, whatever type of system it was, I had a general package for that done, which was nice because it didn't lead me into having to do too much work when it came down to actually performing it on the job site. But when I got to that specific job that I was going to be doing that job at, I would have to actually break it down even further. Are there some intricacies? Are there some things that may be different on this job, or some risks or hazards that I need to take a closer look at specifically for that job in hand? And that's when these job hazard analysis, after the initial one is done, do require a little bit of work. So what I've done is I've included a blank one for you so that you can actually start to use this, or at least use it somewhat, so that you can break this down on your own jobs. So as far as performing the JHA goes, what you want to do is figure out who's going to perform that JHA. Now, of course, many of you are your safety directors for your companies, and that's great. But who else besides a safety director can fill out a JHA? Well, as we talked about in the webinar yesterday, one of our first lines of defense, one of the first people that comes to a job site is going to be the salesperson. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that they're qualified, nor should they be instantly qualified to fill out a piece of paper as important as a job hazard analysis. But if they have the proper training and the know-how, and they can understand the risks that are involved with that specific job, that's a great person to have as a part of our team for filling out a JHA. Some other people that could be included, of course, not only the safety director or the salesperson, but we can also include the foreman, the superintendent, operations teams, some of the workers on the job site, and one of the ones that's often forgotten is that facility owner or facility manager from the building itself. They're going to know the little ins and outs of where the electrical boxes are, or where they've had leaks, or where they've had problems specifically, and even may be able to tell you around the area where your best setup potentially could be. Okay? So what do we actually do when we're doing this? Well, it's as simple as walking around the job site, creating that look of what can we find here on this job site that could potentially affect our job and the risk involved with it. As far as it goes, I always started on the ground and walked around the outside of the facility first, filming, taking pictures, understanding the basics of where I wanted to actually start my job, determining where I was going to set my crane up, where I was going to have my dump boxes, and so on and so forth. Once I completed that, I would then go to the interior of the building. And this is where it's really nice to have a facility manager or a facility maintenance person involved, because what they can do is they can get you into those little back rooms and into the areas that you may not have access to otherwise. After I've performed the inside facility look, and I've gotten up and maybe pushed up some ceiling tiles to look at the underside of the roofing deck, I can then go onto the roof itself. All right, and I inspect that whole roof area for mechanical equipment, electrical lines, whether it's gas lines, whether it's ammonia lines or piping that's up on the rooftop. I can then determine what's going to take place on that rooftop. Now, at any time during this, I can change the plans behind the JHA if I find something different when I get into it. And that's the nice thing about a JHA. You're trying to be all-inclusive, but that doesn't mean you're going to catch everything that first go around. It can change during the course, and this can be tweaked during the course of the job itself. So, of course, like I said, the where, it's on the job site. Unfortunately, with today's modern technology, many people feel that Google Earth or looking at a map, an aerial map on a computer is good enough to get out there and set a JHA in place. But in reality, we do need to get our hands on and actually touch and feel exactly what's on that job site to determine the risks involved or the hazards involved with what we're going to be doing. So I recommend always getting out there and getting in as much as possible. The one downside of this is in many cases you may not be able to get into all sides of a building or in all those rooms in the inside of it. As much as you possibly can, try to predetermine whether or not you have any risks on the inside of a facility as much as on the outside. I mean, we've all done jobs where there's a computer room or an electrical room, or there's going to be people in a specific area that we may need to work over. Those are all risks we need to take into factor with a job hazard analysis. So try and get everywhere you possibly can. One of the best ways to do that, by including that facility manager or maintenance person. Of course, when do we perform the JHA again? Prior to the job. Everything we talk about today is trying to do, pre-planning. I think OSHA's website states, and their stand-down statement is plan, what is it now, Tom? It's plan, train, and provide, I believe. But whatever it is, one of the biggest portions of that is to actually plan out what you're going to be doing ahead of time. And in this case, we try to get all of our information in ahead of time and try to get all that hazard analysis done prior to the job. As I stated before, that doesn't mean that we can actually give up on this JHA, that can't be tweaked during the job. So the when starts prior to the job, but it can go on throughout the course of the job as well. And lastly, why do we perform it? Well, number one, as we stated in the beginning, OSHA's General Duty Clause says that we need to provide a workplace free of recognizable hazards for our employees. And the only way that we can truly do that is by actually taking a look ahead of time. What are the risks involved with their job, and how can I take them out of place? So, we've done our JHA. We've finished our job. It's over. We can wash away. We don't even have to worry about safety anymore. It's all done. Well, in reality, that's when most companies should be picking up the ball and taking and running with it even more. And that's why I say post-job review. So what it is basically a breakdown of what happened at the job. What went right, what went wrong. In many cases, companies review what went right and what went wrong on a basis of, did we make money or did we not make money? But in reality, we should be looking at, were we safe or weren't we safe? So, in a post-job review, who should be at the meeting? Well, number one, we're going to have definitely the safety director or the person in charge of safety for the company. Owners or managers of that company should attend as well, and then also salespeople. If at all possible, I know how busy these people are, but if you can have the foreman or somebody from the crew attend that meeting as well, it's going to be vastly important because they're going to have the know-how of exactly what happened during the course of the job. So, as many people as you can get in this room to determine, what happened during this job from a safety standpoint, it's going to be critical. And then, of course, how do we use that information from the JHA, from the job itself? And one of the best things I can tell you is that I think we have a couple here that used to use this slogan too, quality, productivity, safety, try to keep them equal. All right? If we can review our jobs and understand that safety needs to be of one of the top importances for anything, then we can understand that quality and productivity aren't going to overrule them. Okay? And what I mean by that is we should be taking information from a job hazard analysis as much as possible and utilizing that to set up our next job. So a couple of things that we need to look at is, are we saying that the only thing that matters at our job is money? It shouldn't be. So we have to start focusing on the quality of the job we do and the safety on that job. One of the things about safety that we need to understand is that if safety went well, let's try and repeat it. So figure out what went right on that job site. We had guardrails set up and it seemed to go quicker. We had personal fall arrest systems and they kind of got twisted up or tangled. What went right, what went wrong? And then we utilize that to set up our next job. The success going forward is all based on what we've pre-planned ahead for. And the best way to do that is by reviewing with everybody that would be involved in that. Unfortunately for many companies, we often forget to include salespeople in some of these conversations or some of those team members that may be trying to figure the next job. Okay? And so what I need to let you know is that when we get the sales team involved, when we get owners and managers involved, we can typically bring safety into the picture a little bit wider. Okay? And in that scenario, we can actually start to pre-plan and pre-set up safety within even our sales force. All right?